Hey everybody, how we doing? Happy Tuesday, April 19th, 2022. Brendan Glasheen back here on a Tuesday with Matt Meiselman, Shirag Hira. They are your usual suspects for the NBA slate. There's NBA every day for the next 2 months. It's great.
Good.
We have a minimum of 3 games every day until, we get to the point where we're in the conference semis and so on and so forth. But looking forward to it. Great slate of games tonight. Some larger longer spreads for today's games when you consider who's playing: Atlanta, Miami, Minnesota, Memphis, and then Phoenix hosting New Orleans in game 2. The beauty of the playoffs, as we said in our discussion via Slack today, lines are already up for Wednesday. Lines are up for Thursday. So we can really elaborate and elongate our discussion to later in the week. So we're not just limited to tonight, but we'll be heavy on tonight and then work our way to later in the week. Looking forward to breaking things down here in the association. We'll do a DFS breakdown as well with the 3 games, 6 teams to choose from. Shirag Hira, start with you. How about a leadoff thought on tonight's slate? What's coming to your mind? You look at the slate, you open the DraftKings Sportsbook on your phone, or you open up the DFS slate. What's the first thing that jumps out to you? What comes to mind?
That the Timberwolves use the momentum from that playing game to take game 1. And if this was the biggest playoff series, I thought, in question in terms of like potential upsets, because both teams came in a sense, inexperienced. Sure, Patrick Beverley has had some experience in the playoffs with the Clippers and Rockets or whatever, but generally both teams were very inexperienced coming into this game, and it was prime for an upset. I believe the Grizzlies will show up in game 2. Can they cover the spread? I think it's going to be a close game, so I'm leaning towards the Timberwolves. But that's my biggest thought here, is that the Timberwolves use that momentum in that playing game, came in to Memphis, took game 1, and now they're looking to potentially complete the upset because they're the most likely team in the first round to do it.
Numbers at 7. Minnesota, as you noted, won the game. My struggles with Memphis, and it's been a trend all year, Matt Meiselman, when we talk about the Grizzlies, is they're a fast break team. They got to score points on the break, and you wonder, can that carry over into the playoffs? It's still very early in the postseason. They are at home. You think this is a bounce back spot, but they've got to play a certain way, right, in order to take control and potentially cover 7 points.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to analyze Wolves games. I feel like the Grizzlies, they're unpredictable a little because of Ja Morant being in and out of the lineup all year. And there's been tons of validation for the idea that this team doesn't need Ja Morant to do well. So I think the volatility in Memphis kind of is that, like, there's just been different rosters for them. With Minnesota, they're just such an inconsistent team. And we see that throughout the course of individual games a lot of the time, where they'll get big leads and then they'll blow it, or vice versa. A lot of youth and inexperience. And then even the experienced players, like D'Angelo Russell is high volume shooter, can get hot certain games, disappear other games. There's a lot of ways this game can go. So I'm definitely more interested in it for DFS, where I think this is a game where there were both very chalky players in it, and then also some very unowned players. And I think there's, like, most of the leverage from DFS tonight, I think, will come from this game. But from sportsbook perspective, like, I'm kind of bored by these games. I'm not doing a good job of living in the present moment today. I'm just looking ahead to tomorrow, and more specifically to Thursday. Like, it's just hard for me to look into these games too much, because I guess this is like my catchphrase now, that the lines are all fair, but this is kind of what I think about these games. And the betting value to me is later in the week. And fortunately, we have, as we talked about off air, these lines are already available, so we can dive into those games. But to me, it's more interesting of a DFS night. Sports betting, maybe we can get into the weeds with props and stuff, but the spreads to me just seem pretty accurate.
Total in game 1 for this game was 247, meaning it got there, but I think the number was set 243. It was really high, or maybe it was in the 230s. I apologize, I forget. But now the market is adjusted, right? It's at 240 for this game. Is that something either of you feel? Are we going to get a similar game in game 2, or they're just points galore?
Well,
No?
from my perspective, it's going to depend on fouls a lot, because one thing that happened in game one is we saw both Jaren Jackson Jr. and Steven Adams get in foul trouble. And Adams specifically, his role in the game is pretty massive as far as the total is concerned. Like when you take Adams off the court and then you have more small ball. And then I think we saw a lot of Malik Beasley playing ahead of Jared Vanderbilt. That happened in the play-in round too. Yeah. Where like that is also highly conducive to point scoring. Beasley is like an offense only player. Vanderbilt is like defense and rebounding only. So the dynamic changes a lot from one. Just switching that 1-for-1 on the Minnesota side will change a lot in terms of point scoring. So I don't have strong conviction here. I think depending how you think the rotations look, you could have very different outlooks as far as the total here.
Steven Adams was in some foul trouble. He didn't play many minutes, 24 minutes, didn't even take a shot in that game. But Jackson, Brooks, each picked up 5 on the Memphis side, and on the Timberwolves side, Edwards, Beverly, McDaniels, Beasley all had 5 personals. So yeah, it led to a lot of stoppages. There were plenty of free throws in the game, 43 free throw attempts from Memphis. And John Morant was a big part of that, right? He got to the line 20 times, made 16 free throws. Chirag, you got a thought on that? The total being set as high as it is it? Are we in the same ballpark, you think, again tonight?
I think that there's just going to be a more concerted effort on the defensive end. They just have to. The Grizzlies need to get stops. I mean, Jaren Jackson was in the running, in a sense, for defensive player of the year, and yeah, he played average about 27, 28 minutes a night. But like, they need to lock down defensively to have a chance. They're just going to let D'Lo and Ant just run wild. Like Cat was just crushing it. Like that's not good. That's the recipe for disaster. They need to lock in on the defensive end if they're going to really make a difference here.
Minnesota and Memphis both ranked top 4 in the NBA in pace in the regular season, points per possession, for those of you wondering. And Minnesota was, Minnesota loved to move the ball, and so did Memphis. But again, Memphis is very oriented in getting out on the break. And I wonder, look, their home crowd is fantastic. I think you get a more sense of urgency out of the gate. Minnesota, really, the last couple games here, they win the play-in game that they had to win to get the 7, and they've been riding high right now. Edwards is playing at a high level, and I'm fascinated. I think the matchup they match up very similarly. So it really is a game. In my opinion, like I think you both, Meiselman kind of hit on this because that's his new Twitter bio. You know, the line is fair. That's what it should be, at least in my opinion. The line is fair, Matt Meiselman. Or put it in quotes, if anything. You should put it on a shirt.
Put it on a whiteboard. Put it on a whiteboard.
Whiteboard, yeah. I mean,
I'll just do all of those. All of those are good.
Just take a Sharpie and write it on your shades. You know, like just take each shade and just
write it on my face. Maybe that's the best way.
The lines are fair.
Forehead.
Even your V-neck. I mean, it's great. Put something on it.
It just goes right here. Line fair on his.
The line is fair. Anyway, yeah, I would stay away from the game too. I don't know.
I'm leaning towards the Timberwolves, honestly.
You are? Oh, okay.
+7. I think Grizzlies win, but Timberwolves cover.
No. See, I feel opposite. I feel like if there was anything, I feel like Memphis could blow them out of here tonight. Just, I don't know. You might be right. They match up very well. So it could be a similar game, and why not take the 7 points? Take 3 possessions. Is Atlanta going to put up a better fight tonight against Miami? There are some really, really solid stats out there on Eric Spoelstra and how it's ATS records coming off a winning game 1. Basically, the point I'm getting at with this, and I'll go find it here once I send it to one of you, but you don't want to go against Eric Spoelstra here in this spot. Like it feels Atlanta. There was a lot of Atlanta love going into this series. I think folks are still trying to read into this thing that developed on the sideline in Miami with Haslam and Butler and Spoelstra. I think they're over it. Like this team was in the finals a few years ago. I could see Miami doing very similar things to that it did in game 1. Do either of you feel Atlanta is in a bounce back spot this evening?
Well, I can give a take that I guess it's kind of just no longer relevant, but the reason that I liked the Hawks for this series, it has nothing to do with whatever was going on between Butler and Haslam. It has nothing to do with the way the Heat let us down from a betting perspective in March and April, where they just fell apart in spots where they were playing backups of all the teams and couldn't cover spreads, even where the line moved 5, 6, 7 points because Embiid and Harden rested against them, and then all the Warriors rested against them. They were losing these games outright. It actually has nothing to do with that either. I think the Hawks in general are just very underrated. The problem is we no longer have Clint Capella in the rotation.
Right.
And I actually don't think it's a stretch to say that Clint Capella is the Hawks' best player, because offensively, it's Trae Young, and it's not even close. Trae Young is right up there with anyone in the NBA as far as offensive talent. Right. Trae Young is maybe also the biggest liability on defense of any player in the league. Capella on any team is a great defender and rebounder, but specifically on this team where you have defensive liabilities like Trae Young, you need that rim protector back there. And I like Onyeka Okongwu. I think he's a solid backup, but as a starter, they lose so much with that drop off. So the best way the Hawks can get back in this series, I think one is Capella gets back on the court, which we don't have any indication he's close yet. But two, maybe John Collins returns to form and starts playing the way he did earlier in the season. If we got some kind of indication that Collins is back to 100%, which does not seem very likely. He only played 21 minutes in game one. But if Collins looks good, I think that's when I would start to get interested in the Hawks. So for this game, I'm leaning Hawks on the spread, but I don't feel good about it necessarily. Series line, I might wait. Like I could see this go where Miami wins this game, Collins looks good, but they lose, and then you get the Hawks actually winning both home games, and maybe by that point, Capella returns games 5, 6, and 7. Like a comeback from Atlanta in this series, I don't think is off the table, but I don't see them winning this one. I think that you could get some real value on the Hawks if, let's say, they're down 2-1 and then Clint Capella returns for game 4. I think that's this is wait and see for me. But there's no question. I think like the Hawks are a good team, and we could see them play a lot better than the way they played in game 1. A lot of it will hinge on John Collins, though.
Sure. And they didn't shoot the ball very well. 39. Go ahead.
I don't know if you saw, but he mentioned that he's not going to be 100% whatsoever.
Who's this? Collins, right?
Collins, yeah. He came out and the reporter asked him today, and he just said he's not going to be 100% anytime soon. So, he's playing. It's a playoff, so you got to get in there. But, I mean, there's just a style that he plays with, and it just wasn't there in game 1.
Right. What is it? And, it's not to say he's a bad player, but maybe he's just not there at the, you're kind of what you're getting at. He's not there at the level that he was before his injury. So is he truly a net negative when he's out there? I mean, he didn't do anything special in that first game. He's 10 points in 21 minutes. He was a +2, plus minus on the floor. But you're not getting the same John Collins. And like you guys said, I mean, with no Capella, you've got to have someone in there to fill that void. Here are the nuggets I've got on Spoelstra. Now, look, I know what you're going to say. Well, that was when he had LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. But I've got something to back that up. Spoelstra.
I'm still interested to hear him anyway. We should still talk about the stats.
Spoelstra against the spread as a favorite wins 66% of the time. He's 59-31 this year, or in his career. Miami's 8-0 in their last 8 games as a playoff favorite against the spread. And Spoelstra is 35-20 ATS. That is a 64% clip as a public playoff favorite. 10-4 against the spread when getting 2/3 of the bets. Now, and that record that I mentioned, ATS is a playoff favorite. He is 5-0 post LeBron, post Wade, post Bosh. So
right, because there were plenty of those games 2 years ago when they made their playoff run to the finals.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very confusing with stats like this, because on the one hand, you could say he's really good at making adjustments in a playoff series. Like maybe just the fact that they see the same team over and over again, that's what's producing that. On the other hand, you could say this is why the line is inflated. Everyone's seeing this stuff, and the line is a couple points too high because everyone knows the same thing, and we'll see this start to correct backwards. Maybe it's a mix of both. I do think it's interesting, and I think Spoelstra, if I had to rank the best coaches in the NBA, we'd probably all agree on this. He's up there with anyone. I don't know what happened in March, but there's no question. He has the track record at this point, and he's developed players that no one would consider really good players at all into very competent NBA players, like PJ Tucker's career resurgence. Max Strus is now a starter on a 1 seed. Bam Adebayo kind of came out of nowhere. These aren't, it's not like he was.
Hassan Whiteside really ascended with Spoelstra's coaching too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, I mean, I'll acknowledge like he's a great coach. I don't know if I wouldn't bet the Heat in this game, but it's something to keep an eye on going forward, like potentially deeper in a series too, where, if the Hawks do something different tonight, like play a small ball 5 lineup with John Collins as the 5, maybe the Heat are more positioned to overcome that, bounce back from that, make the right tweaks in practice, look at the film, come back from that going into game 3. But for this game, like the Heat played so well in game 1, they're probably just going to go out there and try to do the same thing in game 2.
Sure. And the Miami Heat putting up 115 points is not normal. Meaning they play their games in lower scoring fashion, right? Their primary focus is to get really good looks thanks to their defense, but they're a team predicated on the defensive end of the floor, unlike Atlanta. But you like you said, you wonder if regression will flip for the Hawks, and they just have a better shooting night. But 27% from 3. Trae Young didn't make a 3. He was 1 for 12. I mean, Trae Young, just eyeball test alone in previous playoffs last spring when they got all the way to they were in the conference finals, weren't they? Huh? Yeah. Wow. It's weird to think that the Hawks were in the conference finals. They were in the conference finals against Milwaukee, and Trae Young, he comes to play. He rarely has back-to-back
You have to also
nights.
take into account their path last year in comparison to this year. Last year, Ben Simmons and the Sixers, whatever Doc Rivers coaching situation they were having, and Julius Randle and the Knicks running out of gas because Tibbs ran them into the ground during the regular season.
Also, the Knicks were just not a good team. The Knicks were just
bad. What?
They got to face a bad Knicks team.
Yeah.
And then they got to face the other thing about the
one
Sixers,
seed, which sure, they're not a great team, and there's other great Eastern Conference teams, but you're going from playing much better. And also keep in mind, Embiid was questionable to start that series last year too.
Right.
He was hurt. Like he was coming back off of something. Like there was just a lot there. Whereas I don't know if they can recreate that magic with Capella dealing with his thing, Colin dealing with his thing. Like,
right. You're facing a fully loaded Miami team too. You're not, the opposition is well oiled. You're not facing a Miami team that has guys banged up.
The injuries are such a problem for the Hawks this year because you have Capella out, obviously, but Collins, like we just talked about, not playing at 100%. And then also Bogdanovic has been on the injury report with an ankle issue for like 10 games in a row now.
Yep.
He doesn't seem to be 100% either. I think Trae Young got over the groin scare that he had later, like towards the end of the regular season. But with Bogdan and Collins not playing healthy, and then the defense worse without Capella, like if Trae Young is doubled for most of the game, which is kind of like the Heat just do that, they can just take your best player out of the game.
Yep.
If Bogdan and Collins can't step up the way they might have been able to if they were healthy, like this, it's tough for them. Maybe, we got those Kevin Huerter heroics against the Sixers last year. We might need some more of that, but otherwise, like, it's going to be pretty tough for them.
So hold on a second. So you say all that. So why are you on Atlanta? Why would you pick Atlanta then?
This is a big line. Like, okay, so to put it in context, if Clint Capella was 100%, John Collins was 100%, and Bogdanovic was 100%, I don't think the Heat are better by any. I think these are even teams in that scenario.
Okay.
I think the Hawks were really good,
but they're not. They're not healthy.
They're not. So, but it's all baked into the line already.
Okay.
All of that stuff is already accounted for. It's more of an explanation as to why this line is so high, why the series price is so high, despite the fact that at full strength these are actually pretty similar teams.
So, Matt, would you consider, if the Hawks get out to a hot start, taking the Heat on the live line?
I don't have a reason. Like,
he's asking for a friend.
Yeah. I think the answer is
it's if you're saying the line is a little bit inflated and you're like, hey, okay, maybe I'm not comfortable taking that.
Yep.
Maybe is it a live bet situation?
Well, I guess it depends. It depends why they're up. I mean, if Collins looks good, I don't want any part of Miami. Like the Hawks will, if Collins just, for whatever reason, the swelling in his finger goes all the way down and his ankle and like everything's good and he's playing great, I think the Hawks can get back in this series. So like, that's really the biggest problem right now outside of the Capella injury.
No. Yeah.
So it kind of depends. Like if Collins looks terrible and the Heat are just cold from the field, like, sure, I think you kind of, I think there's more reason to watch and see how the game's going in the playoffs, but the live line is always just going to be derived from the pregame line. And unless something fundamentally is shifted about the game, like there's no reason to just say, oh, the better team is losing, therefore let me take them now. I know, like if you live bet the Warriors last night,
I did
use that as your and like I just don't think that that's a good strategy.
I was like, well, they're not gonna lose this game. They're down 12 points or whatever. Like, okay, hey, the spread was a little bit bigger. Let me grab it now.
In that case, though, you did have I don't know if you're thinking this way, but you have an actionable reason that the Warriors were down after 6 minutes. Yeah. That was their worst stretch of the game, was the first 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Steph Curry didn't play for the first 6 minutes.
Right.
So like the way their rotation was set up, that actually made sense where, okay, Curry's about to check in. Let me grab him now. Because obviously when Steph gets on the court, the team's way better. If you have something specific like that, I think that's where live betting can be interesting. And honestly, like I was monitoring Steph's live points props. I didn't end up betting anything, but like there are interesting dynamics when rotations get weird. So Collins could be that case tonight where something's weird with his minutes, or like if it's clear in the first half that he looks good, then I'd actually be more interested in live betting the Hawks, taking the Hawks for the series after this game. I don't really see much of a way that it goes the other way where the Heat are undervalued for any reason. It's more like everything is priced in against the Hawks, and if something changes for the better, then that's kind of what I'm waiting for. Either Capella comes back early, Collins looks good, Bogdan looks good. Any combination of those things, I'm going to go with the Hawks side, not the Heat side.
But also keep in mind, a major factor here is bankroll, and also the accepting of you're finding value in this bet. You're not saying I'm taking this bet because I expect it to win. You're looking at taking a bet because you're finding value in that bet, and if it wins in the long run, it makes more sense to get those big spots. Am I understanding that correctly of why you would be looking at the Hawks? Because you're not saying, okay, hey, it's because the value is there, whereas the book is expecting Miami to win.
Yeah, I guess to be able to like do this quickly without us spending the rest of the show and not being able to talk about the Jazz and Celtics, I guess the way I would say it is when you're betting a spread, you have to think it's going to win for it to be good value, because you're betting minus 110, you're laying minus odds. If you don't think it's significantly above 50%, it makes no sense. But yes, if you're betting a long shot underdog, let's say right now, we found out Capella was returning tonight, let's just say hypothetically, and the Hawks are plus 500 to win the series. I don't think they're going to win the series at that point, but the probability would probably move from, let's say, 10% to 25%. And even though it's only 25%, 5-1 is enough where, like, if you play that out over however many times, that's a profitable bet, because 25%, you should only be getting 3-1 for it to be fair. You're getting 5-1. We're not going to see Clint Capella tonight, so that's purely hypothetical. But like, that's the way. It's not based on what I expect to happen. It's based on the probability of what might happen. With spreads, it's easy because everything's minus 110 or minus 105. It's close enough to even where you just bet what you think is going to happen because it's minus 110. Right. That's really the whole consideration. With these like longer shot things, it's a little bit more nuanced.
Well, what's also baked into what you're talking about is what we said off the top too, is how the opposition in Miami adjusts to personnel being in and out of the lineup. So how Collins looks, if they can just take him out of the game. If Capella's out, how does Miami play? That's what makes the series, in my opinion, makes these more, the lines are definitely sharper because they can assess the matchup in more detail. It's not just a one-off game. Jerry, see you on Twitch. We'll get to your thoughts on the DFS side. Just want to touch on, we'll do this briefly. Just want to get thoughts on Phoenix, New Orleans, as Meiselman said. We want to look ahead to the later in the week as well, because tomorrow's a golf show. Thursday, they talk about a bunch of stuff. So we want to make sure we get to some of these other games. But first, real quick, let's get a thought on Pelicans Suns. I was saying this to both of you. A lot of the money is coming in on Phoenix. The rebounding differentiation was drastic. Suns were minus 20 on the glass, but still played a really good game, I thought, defensively against New Orleans. The Suns were minus 19 on the offensive glass. Valanciunas had 25 rebounds, a new career high. Matt Meiselman, do you think 10 is right? Why is this line? The Suns were up 19 at halftime. And okay, a cute little run by New Orleans to make it close at the end. Phoenix still covered and had that game in hand. I'm a little surprised it's at 10. It moved since we last spoke.
Yeah, I guess I don't have anything super interesting to say about the game spread, but if we go into player props here, I think talking about Valanciunas a little bit makes some sense. And this will actually segue to DFS, so maybe we'll just put it over there after this. Cool. As far as the spread, I just think like it opened a little too high, and I think the Pelicans are generally a bit of an underrated team. And maybe this line should be 9 or 9.5. It was up at 10.5. It's just like it was just a little too high of a line. Like not, and I think people who bet for a living may know that, and that's why, despite the fact the public likes Phoenix, the line moved a little towards New Orleans. But I'm not that interested in it. I think if you had to bet this game, you take the 10 points. But like if you ask me what I think the line should be, 9 or 9.5. Like it really is close. So I don't see much there. But the point on the rebounding, I think it was a very strange game because the Pelicans shot 37% from the field. And when you throw up that many bad shots, you're going to get offensive rebounds. Like it's just a product of being bad at offense that they got so many rebounds. And especially like the way that Pelicans miss shots with the way Brandon Ingram plays in particular, it's tons and tons of long twos. And those tend to be pretty easy shots to offensive rebound. And then you have the phenomenon where Jonas Valanciunas is missing tip-ins repeatedly to himself. And that's adding up. Like, I think he had 13 of his 25 rebounds on the offensive glass.
Yeah,
I sort of went through the box score. I'm not sure exactly how many distinct possessions this was, but it was like he generated an extra shot 6 or 7 times. And there were examples where he was going 2, 3, and 4 extra shots, but it wasn't actually creating anything, because to just volleyball the ball to yourself off the backboard is not worth, like each time you do it, your team doesn't gain anything extra.
Yeah, he's not scoring points. He was 7 of 21 from the field.
Yeah. So like I don't think they were valuable rebounds. And I also think that's just a total fluke. Like that's not something we can expect to ever happen again.
Right.
So you've got the over and under both on the bet slip for Valanciunas. I actually like the underside because Valanciunas doesn't rebound like this in general. So I think 2 things are going to happen. The Suns will make a more concerted effort to box him out. And then the other thing that'll probably happen is the Pelicans will just make more shots because there's just no way they can play this bad on offense 2 games in a row. Yes, the Suns are a great defensive team, but there's 37% for a solid offensive team like the Pelicans. That's just unrealistic to do 2 games in a row. So Pelicans will probably play better on offense. There'll be less volleyball attempts for Valanciunas, and he probably winds up like 10 or 11 or 12 rebounds, not 13. So I actually like the under here a bit. I'll save the DFS thoughts for a sec, but like it's going to be interesting to see how people react to this game. I'll just leave it at that.
38% shooting for New Orleans in game 1. They shot better from 3, 39%, but only 23 attempts. They made 9. I was doing this earlier. I think CJ McCollum 3-point prop is actually a nice call tonight. He's at 2.5. I like the over there for McCollum, but no, that's fair. I mean, your point is valid. I think now that makes me second guess taking Phoenix, because you'd think if there's more attention in the paint on Valanciunas. See, the issue I have sometimes at Phoenix, and they can get away with it when they win the game the way they did. They played well defensively all in all, is Ayton just sometimes camps out up top. And I'm like, go put your body on this guy. Like, make it a little more challenging for him. You're giving them life inside. But I guess it's just the way they're very stuck on their principles on switching and shifting defensively, that they took that risk and they were willing, and they kind of have all season. If you look at their rebounding numbers, the Suns aren't a great rebounding team. They're not a great offensive rebound. They're not great defending offensive rebounds or negating offensive rebounds. That makes sense. So it's kind of the way they play, and they just kind of accepted it. Shirag, you have a thought on this game? And if you want to weigh in on DFS, well, I have got it up here so we can just kind of transition as we go.
I just think that the way that even in the third quarter that they came out, they were just playing sloppily. Like it's difficult to explain, but like I just felt that game was just sloppy to start from Pelicans, and if they just clean it up a little bit, that it's definitely more interesting. And and the reason why that 10.5 spread is like appealing to bettors is because those lines, like in the playoffs, like teams, regardless of score, even if they're out of it, even if they're down 10, 12, 15 points, they're still battling because they're trying to build something for the next game or find something. So like it's one of those reasons why I like those bigger spreads in the playoffs than I do in the regular season. I'm very like hesitant to play big spreads in the regular season, but during the playoffs, I'm like, okay, take this side because they're going to try all the way and you can get a free backdoor cover.
It's fair. I mean, it's true. I mean, the Pelicans, they never gave up and they've got talent. That's for sure. It's a young team. That's my
Matt hates narratives, but I try to come up with them as much as possible.
No, I mean, hey, I'm all about it. I mean, I like, instead of trying to pick apart numbers all the time, I think it's fair. I feel like the way, and there are some quotes, I read some quotes in an article from Ayton and Booker that they're well aware of how, and like Meiselman said, it's inflated. It's really, they truly weren't it wasn't that big of a discrepancy on the glass, but they did get their butts kicked on the glass, and it sounds like they're going to make an adjustment. I expect some adjustment, but as Meiselman said, in that case, that could lead to better, more shot making for the Pelicans. They should have a better night at least, but who knows? All right, daily fantasy. We got a 3-game slate, of course, for tonight. We do want to we have plenty of time. We got about 15 minutes, so we can spend some time on this. Jerry's in the chat. Well, I'll just give you what Jerry has here in the chat. He's asking he's essentially asking how to start up a construction for tonight. So 2 studs or 3. He writes Butler, Cat, and Ja. Hero. Who's BOG? Is he talking about? I'm not sure who BOG is.
Bogdan, probably.
I would guess, yeah. Sure. And then says, is that a stretch? Top studs and best value play. So of any of the names he mentioned, is there any interest in Butler, Cat, Ja, Hero, or Bogdanovich?
I mean, Cat, to me, you can't really like go away from 9,500 on a 3-game slate with the chance to play 40 minutes. The floor is extremely high there. And he's dropped multiple games where he had 29 and 13. So if he gets a couple more blocks or drops a 30 and 15 game, like you're looking at 60, 65 fantasy points, and he's going to play all the minutes he can in this playoff series. So like that to me is my top choice to start the build with at 9,500.
You got a thought on Cat, Meiselman?
Yeah, this is I think this is one of the 2 pivotal decisions. I think it's Towns, and then I think it's who you play from Memphis are really the 2 main considerations for me. So like Butler and Bam, I think are fine. I think Hero's fine. You probably mix in some Miami guys because it's a really good matchup without Capella there on Atlanta. Like their defense is bad. So I would say you play someone from the Heat. It doesn't matter too much to me which it is, just kind of whatever fits around the first part of your lineup. But I think that first part, the critical decisions come in the Memphis-Minnesota game. So Towns, I think, will contend for highest owned player tonight, certainly highest owned stud. And it's for the reasons that Shrab gave. He's also a little bit underpriced. He's going to play tons of minutes, provided that it's not a blowout, which is on the table, just given how volatile Minnesota is. Like they could get run off the court. That happens every so often. And then Towns is also unbelievably foul prone. Like he was awful in the play-in game against the Clippers where he just could not stay on the court because he just kept fouling. That's going to happen every so often. So if Towns is 45 or 55% owned or something crazy like that, I actually think there's a good argument to fade him because there's just there's 2 very distinct ways where he doesn't play big minutes, the blowout or just the fouls. And the thing that before I get to like other pivots off of that, I think on the Memphis side, you have the opposite situation where the guys who are generally pretty good were in foul trouble last game. So specifically Jaren Jackson Jr. and Steven Adams. And Brandon Clark played all these extra minutes because both of those guys had to have their minutes limited because they were both in foul trouble.
Yep.
And Memphis lost the game. I don't like if they can change it up from last game, they probably want to. Like, I don't think they want to go with what didn't work last game. If they can keep Jackson and Adams out there, they probably prefer to do that. So I think Brandon Clark only gets the same kind of run he got last game if those same players ahead of him get in foul trouble. And Brandon Clark is going to be really popular because 4,400 is among the cheapest for actual rotation guys. And he's coming off this big fantasy game with 36 fantasy points. Like, everyone's going to want to play him after that. But I think there are definitely ways where Jackson just doesn't get foul. Like, it's hard to say fade Towns for fouls, but don't fade Jaren Jackson, who may be the most foul-prone player in the entire NBA. But the difference is everyone's playing Towns, and I think nobody is playing Jaren Jackson, and instead they're all playing Jaren Jackson's backup.
Right.
So if you think Jaren Jackson has at least some chance to stay on the court, I think you just pivot off Clark, play Jaren Jackson Jr. instead. Maybe you play Steven Adams. I think I'm actually comfortable with playing both Adams and Jackson Jr., even though they sort of do like the same things, or at least they're both bigs on the same team. But I think the leverage is on this game on the whole, where you could, let's say, fade Towns, fade a chalky Brandon Clark, fade a pretty chalky Desmond Bane or Dylan Brooks. Like, I think that's what people are going to do with cheap Grizzlies guys. And instead you put that, and this is exactly how I would do it. I don't know if that was on purpose or accidentally that you clicked John Morant, but I like John Morant. Like, I think that's actually the three Grizzlies you have listed there, I think are super contrarian as a combination, even though they're all starters, because the other guys on the team are so much less expensive and are also the guys who just played well. So I think almost any lineup I would make would have at least one of Jackson or Adams. And then I would strongly consider playing John Morant over Karl Anthony Towns, and then just hoping maybe Towns gets in foul trouble or the Grizzlies just run him off the court.
It's interesting, right? Like, you don't, in DFS, in a playoff series, you don't want to overreact too much to one result from game one. But when we talk about sports betting, you do kind of want to read into it, because in a series, that doesn't necessarily change how a team wants to play. But what we're discussing here is the interchanging of parts, and foul trouble is a big part of that, right? Yeah. Especially with this team, with Adams, as you highlighted, and with Jackson. So in that case, it is appropriate not to overreact to an individual player. Based on how a team plays, though, there might be, in this case, we're talking about like New Orleans and Phoenix. New Orleans, as Chirag said, they did show some signs of life at the end of that game, as to how they could hang around and cover a number. So that is interesting. So just to kind of follow up here, we can use it as a jumping off point. So Jerry's got a build already, and he's basically asking if it's a stretch or not. So he's got, we'll play Jerry's game. Well, Jerry's helping us out here, giving us a measuring stick. So he's got Cat in his lineup. Then he's got John Morant as point guard. Okay. And then he's got Jimmy Butler, I'm assuming at a small forward. Then he's got Hero. I'll just put them all in the regular spots. Hero, and then Bogdanovich. And then the rest is a secret, he says. Is this a stretch?
We can't build his lineup for him.
I know who this
is. That, like, if you have 3,400,
yeah, we can figure out who these players are.
Yeah, like,
that's true.
If
we
you're gonna have a
Brandon Clark, I know that one of these players is definitely Brandon Clark. We don't have to ruin his lineup, but
okay, all right. Well, I can pick apart. Just if you want to pick apart something.
Yeah,
he's playing Trey Murphy. Okay, 100%.
Is it too chalky to have Towns and Morant in your lineup?
No, if you are able to avoid the chalk elsewhere. So if you're playing Morant and you are fading Brooks, Bane, and Clark, I think that's solid. So it's not a let's fade Towns necessarily. It's a fade the combination of Towns with all the cheap Memphis guys. Like, that is a combination is going to be very chalky. So if you want to play a couple of cheap Memphis guys, just don't play Towns. And if you want to play Towns, don't play the cheap Memphis guys, or maybe just limit the amount of them you play. So I think that's fine. I don't think Morant's going to be that popular. I think Hero actually could be relatively contrarian. So yeah, that starting point seems okay. It's just you're now stuck with definitely Brandon Clark and definitely Trey Murphy. In that sense, it's probably too chalky. If you've got different value plays, maybe it looks better then.
Well, Clark doesn't come in at 3,600 or cheaper, so he's potentially going Trey Murphy, DeLon Wright, and taking Dedmon with this Bam questionable or Bam situation, maybe getting fewer minutes. That's how I kind of looked at how he was building that lineup. I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't seem too bad. I mean, I think I would go a different direction and not try to jam both Durant and Towns with Butler. Like, I think that's too much of a stars and scrubs lineup.
Yeah.
But the most interesting player on the slate maybe to talk about is it's the player we were just talking about with Valanciunas, where from a points per dollar perspective, I think
7,500 is not bad.
It's not bad, but Towns will look better from any projection site. Like, it's 2K more for Towns, but his projected points will be so much higher. And then Adebayo, who I think in general is a better fantasy player too, and Valanciunas' matchup is just so much worse. So, like, I don't actually know if J-Val will be contrarian or not. Like, if people were just running projections through an optimizer, no one's playing J-Val. But if you have everyone just box score watching and looking at last game, then everyone's playing J-Val. So it's a really interesting dynamic. Like, he's so far apart in those two categories where, yeah, 7,500 is fine, but there's a lot of guys who look pretty good in that price range. And then 25 rebounds, like, are people just going to react to that instead? So I actually don't really have any idea. Yeah, maybe pivoting. If you think people are playing J-Val, maybe Ayton is the better
Well, I bring him up because, and by the way, you don't get fantasy points for volleyball volleys, but it does.
One rebound each.
They do guess. Yeah, they are rebounds, I suppose. So if you want Valanciunas to miss on purpose, maybe he is pretty valuable, because that's kind of felt like what he was doing in a playoff game.
Trying to break the rebound record.
It's career high for him. Stay Odd writes on YouTube, could easily get the upside from Ayton and pay up elsewhere off of Cat. That's why I brought up the Ayton score log here. And Ayton, 43 plus the last few games. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes. Meiselman's been dying to get involved on Utah, Boston. Let's spend a couple minutes on the games later this week. So hopefully that was enough for you, Jerry. And good luck to you and your lineup that we kind of figured out. I'm joking. Kind of, yeah. But yeah, we kind of know what you're doing. But good luck. Okay, Meiselman, go ahead, shoot. What do you got on Celtics Nets? And you also wanted to weigh in on Utah Dallas on Thursday.
Yeah, so I'll break down Utah first. I think there are some interesting takes on Raptors and Celtics. I sort of like both of those teams to cover their games, but Utah's way more important because before we came on, there was a tweet from Shams, and then there were just follow-ups to that about Doncic for game 3 and 4 and the rest of the series. And my reading of it is that Luka is still questionable to doubtful, like somewhere in the 30 to 50% range in terms of chance to play game 3. I think the reason they're including uncertain for game 3 or 4 is because it's actually on the table that he returns for game 4, not 3. And the thing that we also talked about offline is that Dallas won game 2, which puts them in a much more manageable situation as far as this series is concerned, where if they were down 2-0, they need game 3. Or at least, like, they need a lot more than they need it now. So you could definitely see this work out where it's 1-1. Luka is still a little banged up, and it's a calf injury. They definitely don't want him to re-aggravate it. Then the season's over if he gets re-injured. So they are okay potentially losing game 3 or trying to win with the same group that just won game 2. And then if they lose game 3, they're like, okay, now we're down 2-1. Let's get it tied up so we can get back home with an even series, reclaim home court advantage, and be 2-2 in that case. So I don't think they're going to push him to the absolute limit to play game 3. And the spread, this is why it matters so much, is that this line opened at 7.5, which I think was approximately a midpoint for Luka to play or not play. And with that uncertain update, we actually saw it correct 1.5 points towards the Mavericks, which I think is the wrong direction. I would have moved this 1.5 points the other way and made it Jazz -9 at this point, not 6. Because I think if Luka's in, we see a line somewhere around 4.5 or 5. And if he's out, I think we see it somewhere around 10.5 or 11. And in both cases, I think that's fair. I think the market is pretty good, like as far as the final result. So with Luka, probably not. Like, I think it's 60-40 he sits. It should be closer to that 10.5, 11 number. But instead, we're getting -6, which is a massive difference. So I think there's a ton of value on this. It's an interesting game to try to play. Like, when do you bet this?
Yeah.
Do you take it now and then you get burned if he actually winds up out there? Because it's not a good bet if Luka plays. It's only a good bet if he doesn't play. but it's a really, really good bet if he doesn't play. And you can say all you want about Utah collapsing and Rudy Gobert not being able to guard 3-point shooters or whatever, but without Doncic on the court, the Jazz are the much better team. There's a reason they were favored by 5 in both away games. They're only favored by 6 at home. So I think I would go after this now, or at a minimum, just be ready to bet it once we find out that he's not in. But this line is crazy if Luka's not available. Like, the Jazz will be favored by double digits once he gets ruled out, if he gets ruled out.
Meiselman's telling you to not go to bed and have your phone out.
Yes.
And yes, like that's what he does.
Just look at Mavericks Twitter and don't sleep ever.
That's what he does. So if you want to know what he means by that, that's what he means. Don't sleep and get alerts on your phone. Right? Chirag, you got to monitor that news.
Yep, exactly.
And then one last thought before we go on Celtics Nets. Celtics Nets is tomorrow, game 2 in Boston.
Yeah, I'll give a quick answer and then let Chirag weigh in. But I think the Celtics, I don't know. It's so hard because now I've got the Celtics.
What do you mean you don't know? You said you wanted to talk about this game.
Okay, I'll tell you why I don't know. It's because I have so much now riding on this Celtics futures betting thing that we've been talking about all year.
What's your future on the Celtics to win the
Eastern Conference and the title?
Okay,
because we've been on Celtics since start of 2022. This is long time coming now. I think that there's value at -3.5. I think this line should be 5 or 6. But because I'm already in on the Celtics, I don't know that I want to keep betting on the Celtics. But I do think there's something there. The game that's more interesting to me betting-wise is I think the Raptors are in a good bounce-back spot. Getting, I think, a not sick Gary Trent back in the lineup will be a big deal. Scotty Barnes isn't going to play game 3, but we saw Gary Trent.
Thybulle's out, right?
Thybulle's out, yes. So
Thybulle's
that's definitely a big deal. And then I think, like, Trent basically went out on the court last game and was doing everything he could not to throw up. Like, he was not well enough to play basketball, but I think he'll be fine for game 3, and then that'll give the Raptors the boost they need. So I kind of expect the Raptors, even at 2-point underdogs, I sort of think they should be favored in this game.
Hey, the fact that they're 2-point underdogs is very, like, fishy to me. Like,
yeah,
like, what's going on here?
Yeah, why is it 2? Why is it more than 1 possession?
No, I mean flying to Toronto and dealing with that whole situation and really getting situated. Like, I could see why this line is the way that it is, and it you could potentially look to, like, take something if Toronto gets out. Like, I'm more like, when I'm watching these games, I'm also looking for these ones kind of like live betting. I don't know, just experiences, because there's a part
watching
of this...
the games for live betting. I'm just staring at Mavericks Twitter.
Yeah, it's fine. Shrog's already revealed that. That's why he asked you about Atlanta and Miami tonight.
Yeah. Well, no, I honestly, like, I can't do this during the regular season. During the regular season, it's like, it's cost me too many times. But, like, at least in the playoffs, you're sitting there, you're like, all right, everyone's gonna try 150% here. Like, we saw Maxi Kleber going out and, like, trying 1,000,000,000% last night. Like, these guys are really out here to do their job, and they're gonna, their lives are on the line. So, like, to me, it makes it a little bit easier to find that motivation, whereas in the regular season, you're searching for that. And then the Raptors coming home, finding that series, they don't want to go down 3-0. Sure, Scotty Barnes is part of the future of that team now,
and he's
considering
out.
the way he showed up. But, like, Fred VanVleet's not going to be that horrible 2 games in a row, but he's being searched out on the defensive end,
right?
And so that's what's making it difficult. But I think that +2 is pretty really solid right there. I wish it was more, but did the line move at all? I didn't get a chance to see if it was 4 or 5.
It's just been kind of hovering, because first we got the confirmation that Thibault would be out. Like, I guess everyone kind of knew that, but that came up on the injury report. And then the Barnes and Trent, with Trent, I guess, upgraded to questionable, Barnes remaining doubtful. It's been between 1 and 2.5 for most of the day. I mean, if the Raptors had Barnes, I don't think anyone would be questioning that they're close enough to the Sixers, especially without Thibault, that they deserve to be home favorites. And there's definitely a phenomenon in playoff series where when a team is down 2-0 and returning home, the motivation kicks in and actually helps. But if they then go down 3-0, it's almost a detriment, where, like, they're demoralized. And I think you see like if Philly wins this game, they might be -5 for game 4. We'll actually see it go higher because the motivation doesn't work in Toronto's favor. The fans definitely won't be as into it with a 3-0 deficit. I think historically there's some basis for that where game 4 lines are higher than game 3 lines if it's 3-0 at that point. But 2-0 is still like they're in the series. I think they still get a pretty big boost. And this is not your normal road trip. Philly has to go to Canada. Like we've talked about this during the regular season. Going to Toronto for games, forget the crowd and everything. Like it's hard to go there. Like it's an ordeal to go to a different country to play basketball. So I think that does help a little bit with the Raptors side.
I would look at the Raptors in the first half. I've got issues with how the minutes that Siakam and Van Vliet have played. I still feel like Philly could. I could see the Raptors getting off to a good start, as they did in the game in Philly. They got off to a fantastic start. They just ran out of gas. I don't know if they have enough.
That's totally valid.
It's catching up with them. And like, Maxey has been phenomenal. Some budding players in this playoffs. Poole and Golden State, Maxey with the Sixers are two that just come to mind right away. Phenomenal.
Can we check one quick thing before we have to jump? There is a series prop. I think it's next to series markets. This was up yesterday. Maybe it's not now. For most three-pointers made in Sixers Raptors, we can just quickly see where Maxey is. It's not there. But the point is Maxey's 3-point shooting has elevated a ton, and maybe there's something. Maybe that line will pop up before the next game. But he was not making threes for most of the year. Now he is. It's been pretty amazing to watch. Yeah.
So, and my point being is James Harden can be their third best player. He'd just be a facilitator. Doesn't really have to try that hard. That's all. But we do need to go, as Meiselman mentioned. Great stuff, gents. Looking forward to another slate of games tonight, and we look forward to the rest of the week. I'm sure basketball will be discussed at some point later in the week. LaMarcus here Friday, Emerson and Reed on Thursday. Maybe not. We'll see. Anyway, you guys do a great job with your content over on the playbook. So keep it going. Content specialist, Shrag Hira.
That's actually inaccurate, but okay.
Just keep the name. It's good. It's better
sorry. Whatever, Shrag. What are you, content manager or something now?
Yeah, I definitely did get my promotion.
Specialist is above manager, I think.
Yeah.
Shrag Hira, content manager of DK Live. He is also a DFS and betting analyst at DraftKings, the DraftKings Sportsbook, and NBA Bet. You do it. Oh, really quick. Last thing. Are you doing any of those streams during the playoffs?
No, they're only for the league pass games.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well, those are hey, Meiselman will back me up. I was promoting you doing those on these shows.
I appreciate that.
No problem. Okay. Remember where you came from. Thanks to I'm just kidding. Thanks to Heyman and Tom behind the scenes. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Best of luck tonight, and we will see you tomorrow with the Sweats at 11. The show just around 5 o'clock Eastern. We'll see you.